Science is often described as a way of reducing uncertainty. It classifies, compares, measures, and tests. It takes things that seem strange and places them in a pattern. But every so often, something appears that does not fit the pattern at all. Not because it is supernatural and not because the evidence is false, but because the categories themselves seem to fall short. Here are 10 discoveries scientists still can't explain. Number 10. Denisovan DNA. It began with something very small, a fragment of bone unearthed from Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia. On its own, it did not look especially remarkable. Archaeological digs produce countless fragments like it. Most are cataloged, compared, and quietly absorbed into existing narratives of the past. The assumption was that this piece, too, would belong somewhere familiar. If not a modern human, then perhaps a Neanderthal. If not a known species, then at least a known branch. But when scientists extracted mitochondrial DNA from the sample, the result refused to cooperate. It did not match modern humans. It did not match Neanderthals. It did not sit neatly inside the categories researchers had spent decades building. At first, that should have been impossible. By the time the sample was tested, the human story of Eurasia already seemed crowded enough. Modern humans were there. Neanderthals were there. The expectation was not that a tiny finger bone would reveal a missing chapter, certainly not a major one. So researchers went back, not forward. Denisova Cave had already been known as a site of deep antiquity, a place where layers of habitation stretched across enormous spans of time. Stone tools, ornaments, animal remains, and traces of ancient human presence had accumulated there over tens of thousands of years. The cave itself sat at a crossroads of migration, on the edge of vast regions through which different human groups may have moved, overlapped, and disappeared. For years, such sites had been used to fill in the known map. This one seemed, at first, to be doing the same. The bone fragment was tested again. New precautions were taken. Contamination had to be ruled out, because contamination is often the first refuge when an ancient DNA result makes little sense. The extraction was repeated, the sequencing checked, the comparisons widened, yet the anomaly remained. The sequence was real. The divergence was deep. Whatever human group this bone belonged to, it seemed to have separated from the others much earlier than expected. In time, the name Denisovan entered the scientific vocabulary, but naming a thing is not the same as explaining it. The discovery solved one mystery only by creating several more. Where exactly had Denisovans lived? Were they confined to one region, or spread widely across Asia? Were they a single population, or several distinct groups? How often did they meet Neanderthals? And how often did they meet modern humans? Even now, the most unsettling part of the story remains the same. A new branch of humanity entered the record not through a clear skull, or a skeleton, or a civilization, but through a sequence that had no proper place to go. Number 9. Longyu Caves. In Zhejiang province in China, villagers had long regarded a series of water-filled ponds as ordinary features of the landscape. Then, in the early 1990s, the water was pumped out. What emerged underneath was not one cavern, but a vast complex of hand-cut chambers, pillars, walls, and ceilings carved directly into rock. They became known as the Longyou Caves. At a glance, they look impressive. With a little more attention, they become troubling. The caverns are large, geometrically controlled, and marked throughout by deliberate chisel patterns. Pillars were left standing to support the roofs. Surfaces were shaped with extraordinary consistency. Entire chambers seem to have been excavated with a level of coordination that implies planning, labor, and technical understanding on a very substantial scale. And yet their purpose remains obscure. This is the part that gives the caves their strange quality. Large ancient works usually leave some trace of why they were made. A tomb, a quarry, a storage site, a sanctuary, a military refuge, a hydraulic system. Something in the design tends to point toward use. But the Longyu Caves resist that clarity. No unambiguous written record explains them. No single interpretation fully accounts for their scale. Even the simple question of who organized the work remains unsettled. Historians and archaeologists have tried to place them in the broader context of ancient China. The construction is often thought to be around 2,000 years old, perhaps older. That alone is enough to make the labor involved striking. Excavating chambers of this size by hand would have required sustained effort, careful organization, and a strong reason for doing so. Yet the reason is what remains hidden. Modern technical study has deepened the mystery instead of removing it. Researchers have examined the rock mechanics, the stability of the caverns, and the curious way some interior surfaces remained remarkably intact while submerged. In some areas, cracking appears to have worsened only after the chambers were exposed again. This turns the caves into not just an archaeological puzzle, but an engineering one. They were durable enough to survive for centuries in concealment, and still they offer no clear explanation of intent. It is one thing for a civilization to build something monumental. It is another for that monument to survive after its purpose has disappeared almost completely. Number 8. Roman dodecahedrons. Across parts of the old Roman world, mostly in the northwestern provinces, archaeologists have found small hollow objects made of bronze. They have 12 pentagonal faces, circular holes of varying sizes, and knobs at each corner. They are now called Roman dodecahedrons. They are real. They are not singular curiosities. Enough have been found to show that they belonged to a recognizable tradition. Skilled metalworkers made them. They were valuable enough to cast and preserve. They existed within Roman material culture, and yet no one can say with confidence what they were for. This is where the problem begins. In archaeology, repeated objects are often easier to interpret than isolated ones. Patterns should help. Similarity should narrow possibilities. But in this case, the pattern seems only to widen the uncertainty. Dodecahedrons have been found in different contexts, not all of which point in the same direction. They do not appear clearly tied to one function, one class of owner, or one type of space. More strangely still, Roman written sources seem to say nothing definite about them. That silence matters. Rome documented many aspects of practical life, religion, administration, and craft. For an object to appear physically in the archaeological record while remaining effectively absent from explanation is an unusual kind of gap. Theories have multiplied: measuring device, ritual object, candle holder, tool for craft work, military instrument, symbol of status, toy, scepter fitting, agricultural aid. None of these ideas is entirely absurd, and that is part of the difficulty. Several can be argued from shape, size, and wear, but none has secured consensus. In that sense, the dodecahedrons reveal a limit that archaeology often hides well. An object can be authentic, numerous, skillfully made, and still inaccessible in meaning. It can survive materially while its function disappears almost without residue. Number 7. The Maine Penny. In 1957, at an indigenous archaeological site in Maine, a silver coin was reportedly recovered. It was later identified as a Norse coin from the reign of Olaf Kyrre, dating to the late 11th century. The implication seemed immediate. A medieval Scandinavian coin had somehow appeared in North America centuries before Columbus. At first, the object seemed to point toward a dramatic conclusion. Vikings had reached North America. That much was already becoming more plausible. Could this coin be another piece of that story? Could it suggest contact farther south than the better-known Norse sites? But the moment the idea became exciting, the difficulties emerged. It was only one coin. No broader Norse assemblage came with it. No cluster of clearly Scandinavian artifacts surrounded it. The coin was genuine enough to merit serious attention, yet its pathway was not. That difference has kept the mystery alive. One explanation is that the coin traveled through indigenous trade networks. That would not be impossible. Objects can move astonishing distances without the people who made them ever traveling alongside them. A coin can become ornament, curiosity, or exchange item. It can pass from hand to hand until the original context becomes meaningless. In that sense, the coin might not prove a Norse presence in Maine at all. But that does not settle the matter either. Because another question remains. Was the reported excavation context fully reliable? Could the coin have been introduced later, accidentally or deliberately? Was it genuinely recovered where it was said to have been found? Or was the story attached to it after the fact? So the Maine Penny remains suspended between authenticity and context. The coin itself may be exactly what it appears to be. The journey is what no one can quite reconstruct. Number 6. The stone spheres of Costa Rica. In the Diquís Delta of Costa Rica, large stone spheres have been found at several archaeological sites. Some are less than a meter across, others are much larger. They are associated with complex societies that flourished before European contact. They are unquestionably real, unquestionably human-made, and still, in one important sense, largely unexplained. The mystery is not whether people shaped them, it is why they did so and what those spheres meant in the landscape they belonged to. Their production required considerable effort. Some display notable geometric precision. They were not random boulders gathered by chance. They were formed, placed, and in some cases arranged. But many of the original contexts were disturbed before modern archaeology could document them properly. Looting, movement, and later landscaping altered the settings in which the spheres once stood. That matters deeply, because arrangement may have been part of the meaning. Once moved, a sphere remains impressive, but becomes harder to read. Interpretations have been proposed. Markers of power, symbols of rank, elements of ceremonial space, territorial signs, features aligned with important dwellings or routes, all remain plausible. None is final. UNESCO itself describes their meaning, use, and production as still largely mysterious. That phrasing is unusually revealing. It does not mean nothing is known. It means that what is known does not resolve the central question. Why spheres with such insistence? Why there? Why in those patterns? The stones survive. The intention does not. Number 5. Dog figurines. Across Japan, thousands of clay figurines from the Jomon period have been uncovered. They are called dogu. Some are small, some are more elaborate. Many have strongly stylized bodies, exaggerated features, and a sense of deliberate symbolism that is obvious even before one understands anything about them. The problem is that understanding has never become singular. Dogu are often described as ritual objects, and that may well be true. But ritual is a broad word. It can hide uncertainty more than it removes it. Were they linked to fertility, healing, protection, childbirth, hunting success, household rites, social identity? Some may have served one purpose, some another, and some perhaps changed meaning over time. Their broken condition complicates matters further. Many have been found fragmented. Some scholars have wondered whether breakage was deliberate, perhaps part of the object's function. Others are more cautious. Objects break for many reasons, and archaeology does not always preserve intention in the fracture. What makes dogu enduringly mysterious is not that they are rare, but that they are abundant and still resist a single interpretation. The people who made them invested time and meaning into forms that are visibly important. The figures remain. The exact role they played in everyday or ceremonial life does not. Number 4. The Voynich manuscript. There are few objects as famous for resisting explanation as the Voynich manuscript. It is a handwritten book filled with strange script, unusual illustrations, botanical forms that do not easily correspond to known species, astrological diagrams, and scenes that seem to hover between medicine, symbolism, and something harder to name. For a long time, one response to the manuscript was simple suspicion. Perhaps it was a fake. Perhaps it was meaningless gibberish. Perhaps it only looked ancient because people wished it to be. Scientific testing made that easy dismissal much harder. Radiocarbon dating placed the parchment in the 15th century. Ink and pigment analysis have been broadly consistent with materials of that period. The object itself appears to be real. It belongs materially to the late medieval world. And that only sharpens the central problem. If it is real, what is it saying? The script has not been definitively deciphered. It shows patterns that resemble language in some respects. Repetition, structure, clustering, too much order for easy nonsense, perhaps. Yet still no accepted reading, no universally recognized key, no confirmed author, no clear purpose. This is one of the purest forms of scientific frustration. The manuscript can be described chemically, physically, and historically. Its material existence is no longer the primary mystery. Its meaning is. A book survives for centuries and still refuses to become readable. Number 3. The Phaistos disc. Discovered in 1908 at Phaistos on Crete, the Phaistos disc is a fired clay object stamped with symbols arranged in a spiral. Even at first glance, it seems unusual. The symbols were not scratched in casually. They appear to have been impressed into wet clay with individual stamps. In that sense, it looks strangely systematic, almost like a very early experiment in repeatable text production. Yet the inscription remains unread. The problem begins with scale. The text is short. There is no bilingual comparison, no equivalent of a Rosetta Stone. The symbols have not yielded a secure translation, and the disc stands too alone to anchor a decipherment with confidence. Many theories have been proposed. Hymn, ritual text, game board, inventory, prayer, imported object, local creation. The disc absorbs these ideas without confirming any of them. There is also the question of authenticity. Some have argued it could be a hoax. That argument has never fully disappeared, but neither has the case for its genuineness. Archaeological context, physical study, and the details of the object itself keep the debate open without closing it in either direction. And so the Phaistos disc sits in a museum, visible, finite, and utterly unresolved. It is not hidden, it is not destroyed, it is simply unreadable. Number 2. Rongorongo. On Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island, a small number of inscribed wooden objects preserve what appears to be a writing system. It is called Rongorongo. The glyphs are unmistakably deliberate. They were carved, repeated, and transmitted. Yet the script has never been convincingly deciphered. For many years, one of the deepest questions surrounding Rongorongo was whether it was invented before European arrival or only after contact. If it arose independently, it would represent one of the very few known inventions of writing in human history. If it emerged after contact, the story would be different, though no less complicated. Recent radiocarbon work has given the debate a new and unsettling dimension. One wooden tablet has been dated to the 15th century, well before European contact with the island. On the surface, that seems to push strongly toward pre-contact origins. But the caution arrives almost immediately. Radiocarbon dates the wood, not necessarily the carving. Old wood can be carved later. The result is powerful, but not absolute. And this uncertainty sits inside a larger one. So little of the corpus survives. Fewer than 30 objects are known. Historical disruption on the island was severe. Cultural continuity was broken. Whatever interpretive tradition once existed was lost before modern scholarship could recover it. That leaves researchers with fragments, not fluency. In a way, Rongorongo embodies the archive at its most fragile. A script may have existed. A reading tradition certainly did. The objects endured just long enough to prove that much, but not long enough to tell us what they say. Number 1. The WOW signal. On the 15th of August, 1977, a radio telescope operated by Ohio State University detected an unusually strong narrow-band signal. It lasted for 72 seconds. On the printout, astronomer Jerry Eman circled the sequence and wrote one word beside it. Wow! The signal quickly entered modern scientific folklore, not because it proved anything, but because it did not behave in an ordinary way. It rose and fell as though a source in the sky were passing through the telescope's field of view. It was far stronger than background noise. It was striking enough to demand attention, and then it never came back. This is the kind of mystery that sits uneasily within science, because it resists the usual path to certainty. A buried object can be re-examined, a manuscript can be retested, a bone can be sequenced again. But a signal is an event. If it does not repeat, inquiry becomes inference. Possible explanations remain. Human interference has never been entirely ruled out. Natural astrophysical sources have been suggested, though none has secured universal acceptance. More speculative interpretations have lingered at the edges for obvious reasons. Yet after all this time, the signal has not been reproduced in the same way. It remains singular. That singularity is what gives it its peculiar force. The data are real enough to be memorable, not stable enough to be settled. And perhaps that is what links all of these discoveries together. Not the idea that science is helpless, but the quieter and more difficult idea that evidence is often incomplete in ways no amount of intelligence can fully repair. A fragment of bone can reveal a human lineage before it. Reveals a face. A carved chamber can outlast its purpose. A script can survive without its language. A signal can be measured without being explained. The past is not simply hidden. In many places, it is damaged, partial, and unevenly preserved. Science can narrow possibilities, discard weaker explanations, and sometimes overturn old assumptions with extraordinary precision. But precision is not the same as closure, and so these discoveries remain where they are, at the edge of understanding, not beyond evidence, but beyond conclusion. Quiet reminders that history is not a complete record, only what happened to survive.